In a moment, we'll be joined by economist and Australian contributing editor Judith Sloan, but I want to have a little chat more about immigration and make this point. Australia took in 500,000 migrants the past year, more than double the amount we were taking in before COVID. This is almost half the population of Adelaide and over 100,000 more than the population of Canberra. And the numbers are overwhelmingly headed to the overcrowded major cities of Sydney and Melbourne. Who knows where they will live? Because for every 1,000 new migrants, as many as 500 new dwellings must be built to accommodate them. That means we're short. We're going to need to build around 800,000 new homes by 28, to keep up with the current intake. And yet, Labor's Housing Australia Future Fund is only slated to construct 30,000 new social and affordable rental homes over the same time. Again, it's a joke. And joining me to talk more about the details of this is contributing economics editor at the Australian newspaper, Judith Sloan. Judith, thank you so much for joining me tonight on the program. I want to start with Labor's announcement today, ostensibly to cut overall migration, but really not so much, was it?
I think it was extremely underwhelming, James. So they don't want to be seen to advocate Big Australia, but they are still advocating Big Australia. And you only need to look at the numbers. So there will have been about 900,000 additional migrants over the first 2 years of the Labor government. And then they're proposing to cut about 200,000, or actually closer to 185,000, over 4 years. So there's a really nice chart in the Financial Review which had it sort of the before and the after, and it was a very narrow wedge. So I think they're trying to accommodate the politics, but in fact they're giving into what I think are very powerful pressure groups who want to keep things as they are. So who are those pressure groups? They're big business, they're the universities, they're the property sector. There are some other groups as well. And it's interesting, and you probably noticed this, James, that those groups have all basically come out in support of the migration policy announced today by Clare O'Neil.
Well, yeah, I did notice that. And I wonder, too, though, how much of, the headlines around this and the headlines that they've worked very hard to generate have been about managing the politics of the issue and hoping that people don't actually notice, because it seems to me that they're in a position where they're either going to have to do something real about this and force an actual GDP recession, or face real pain at the ballot box when people say, you know what, we did not vote for this big Australia. We never voted for it. It never went to the ballot. We're going to punish somebody for this, and you happen to be in the frame for it.
But, James, they're getting very faulty advice from Treasury. So last October, remember, Jim Chalmers decided, probably superfluously, to have a budget in October. At that time, we were told for last financial year the net overseas migration would be 235,000. We thought, OK, that's kind of, what it was before the pandemic. We can live with that. It then was by May, so not much longer after that, they said, well, it's actually going to be 400,000. So that looked very bad. We now know, they're now conceding that it has been 510,000 just in the space of one financial year. And the point is, we also know where it's largely coming from, and this is this almighty surge in international students. Now, I think most governments would think we need to cap these numbers, we need to restrict these numbers. But instead, they've got a few little policies. We're going to make sure that they're better at English. We're going to sort of clamp down on colleges we don't like. Nothing much about the universities, I might add. And so I think what you'll find is that those numbers, they might decline a little bit, but this is really a smoke and mirrors policy response. It's trying to tell the people, they know what the polls are saying, that the people don't like such a large migrant intake, and they're sort of pretending to act on it while keeping their friends happy.
You know, Judith, we talk about skilled migration too, though, and obviously there are places where, we need to get more people in to help do certain specific jobs. But I spent some time today looking at the 674 different skilled occupations on the list. I only got through the A's, but they had author, like of a book. They had arborist, like the guy who comes and does your trees. And they even had amusement center manager. So in case you don't have somebody to manage the tilt-a-whirl for your fate, you can get somebody from overseas to do it. This is clearly another avenue that's just being hugely exploited, isn't it?
James, the list. I mean, you could kind of write a comedy about the list. And as you say, the list is so long. And it's sort of game. So the employer groups, anyone who has any kind of difficulty recruiting a person at potentially the low wage they want to offer, instead try and get that occupation on the list. I mean, for a very long time, we've had accountants, we've had dentists, we've had all sorts of groups who they'll tell you have not been in short supply. I mean, in due course, I think the list has to go, and that would be, I think, serious reform. But at the moment, the government is only sort of tinkering around the edges in terms of the actual migration policy.
And finally, Judith, before I let you go, I want to just ask you about the Commonwealth budgetary numbers. You mentioned the Treasury before. Well, it's come out that the Commonwealth is going to be on the hook for another $80 billion in borrowing costs over the coming decade, thanks to rising interest rates since May. Does this sort of blow up their narrative that, oh, we're doing great and we're, having surpluses to the never just because of commodities prices? And are we in the frame for higher taxes, lower spending, or just more money printing in debt? Judith Sloan.
Well, I thought this story, the cynical me thought, well, this is a drop. So it's obviously the case that, and we saw this actually in the May budget, that what are called the net interest payments, so that's the debt we've accumulated, we're having to pay interest payments, there's a real kick up towards the end of 24, 25, 25, 26, because the low interest debt has to be rolled over. But I think what the Treasurer was trying to say is, look over there, I can't be blamed for that. And he was trying to make the point that, now net interest payments are the fastest growing item in the budget as opposed to the assumed growth in the NDIS. Now, can I emphasise assumed growth? Because I'm not absolutely sure, talking about smoke and mirror policy responses, what we had last week might have sounded good, but it's not clear that the growth in the NDI spending, don't forget, they are promising to get it down from 14% a year to 8% a year, but that is just an assumption at this point. So I think that story that was, dropped to the newspapers is kind of trying to build up that narrative.